Every person, no matter how calm they seem on the outside, carries a storm inside, a storm of thoughts, fears, doubts, and silent conversations that never leave the mind. You can be surrounded by people smiling, laughing, working, doing everything right, and still feel like something inside you is barely holding on. That feeling doesn't mean you're weak. It means no one ever taught you how to guard your mind. We learned how to chase goals, how to work harder, how to survive, but not how to rest, not how to release, not how to stay clear when everything feels loud and demanding. We were never shown how to sit still when the world keeps shouting, move faster. But maybe the peace you are looking for isn't something you find out there. Maybe it's something already within you waiting to be uncovered. Peace is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of understanding. The Stoics believed that real strength begins with mastering the self, especially the mind. Our thoughts, when left on their own, can become chains that limit us. But when we understand them, they become tools that free us. So today we clear the noise. We quiet the inner storm. We focus not just on what matters, but on what frees us. If you are walking a path toward clarity, inner strength, and peace that cannot be shaken, consider being part of this journey, because the mind you shape becomes the life you live. Most people move through life believing every thought they think must be true. If it appears in their mind, it must mean something important, something deep. But your mind is not a courtroom, and your thoughts are not evidence. They are echoes, shadows of memories, fears, experiences. They sound like you because they have lived with you for so long. They speak in your voice because they know your patterns. But just because a thought wears your language does not mean it speaks your truth. You are not the thought, you are the one hearing it, the watcher, the observer. And the moment you see that clearly, something powerful begins. You stop being pulled by every storm that passes through your mind. You stop treating every fear like it is a prophecy. You begin to notice the space between reaction and choice, and in that space lives your power. You can choose not to follow the same painful stories. You can choose to pause before falling into the same spiral. You can choose not to turn someone's rejection into your identity. That choice, that quiet awareness, is where real change starts, because without it you're stuck repeating the same patterns, reacting instead of responding, surviving instead of living. When you no longer mistake your thoughts for yourself, the whole battlefield inside you begins to calm. You start to observe instead of absorb, and that simple shift turns down the volume of the noise that once controlled you. Many people spend years trying to fix themselves when they were never truly broken. The only thing that needed healing was the belief that every thought they had was fact. Phrases like, "I'm not good enough," "they don't care about me," "I'll always be this way." These are not truths. They are patterns repeated so often they started to sound real. But feelings are not facts, and thoughts are not who you are. You are not the anxiety that appears in a crowd. You are not the memory that rises when you're alone. You are not the fear that whispers when you're about to start something new. You are the one who notices all of it. And in that noticing there is freedom. You can step back. You can breathe. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That single truth can change everything. You are not your past, you are not your pain, you are not your mistakes. The thoughts that rise from those wounds do not have to become your identity. They can come and go like passing clouds if you let them. To do that, you must stop chasing them, stop arguing with them, stop fearing them. You must learn to watch them with calm eyes and steady breath, because only when you see clearly can you respond wisely. It's not about forcing the mind to obey like a machine. It's about tending to it like a garden. Some weeds grow on their own beliefs planted long ago. But once you see them, you get to decide which ones stay. Little by little, you make space for something intentional. Clarity is not having no thoughts. It's understanding that not every thought deserves your attention. Peace is not silence. It's the strength to not feed every impulse that comes your way. That strength grows with awareness. At first, the noise will grow louder when you stop answering it. That's normal. That's the mind trying to pull you back. But with time, silence returns. Not the empty kind, but the kind full of you. The you that exists beneath fear and doubt. The you that remains when the storm fades. Even one moment of that stillness is victory. Even one breath where you notice a thought without drowning in it is progress. It's the first crack in the wall, the first place light gets in. And the more often you create that space, the less you live on autopilot. You begin to notice yourself before reacting. You begin to choose instead of repeat. You start living your life instead of just surviving your thoughts. Because clarity never comes from more thinking. It comes from noticing, from pausing, from being aware. It comes from creating distance between who you are and what your mind says you are. That space is your freedom. It's where your focus returns and your energy stops leaking into what-ifs. It's where you begin to rise above the noise and start truly living. The moment you realize you don't have to believe every thought is the moment your healing begins. Because your mind is not your enemy. It's just untrained. It repeats what it's been taught by pain, fear and survival. It learned to protect you even when it hurts you. That voice that says you're not enough isn't evil. It's scared. It speaks from old wounds trying to keep you from being hurt again. But safety built from fear will never bring peace. To find peace, you must stop fighting your mind and start understanding it. Sit with the noise. Don't run from it. Ask it what it's trying to protect, what it's trying to warn you about. And then gently remind it that you are not the same person who got hurt before. You can handle more. Now you can choose different. When you stop seeing your thoughts as commands and start seeing them as signals, everything shifts. A thought like "I can't do this" no longer means stop. It means you're standing at the edge of growth. A thought like "they don't like me" no longer means hide. It means you care about connection. Awareness turns fear into understanding. And understanding turns pain into wisdom. That's what the Stoics meant when they said the obstacle is the way. The things that challenge your peace are the same things that can deepen it. Every storm teaches you how to stand. Every doubt shows you where faith must grow. Every fear points to a place that still needs light. When you stop running from the noise, you start mastering it. You realize the storm was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to wake you, to pull you back to yourself. Peace doesn't come when life gets easy. It comes when the mind learns to stay steady. You can have chaos around you and still be calm inside. That calm is not luck, it's practice. You build it every time you pause before reacting, every time you breathe instead of break, every time you choose presence over panic. That's real power, not control over others but mastery over yourself. Because when you can stay centered no matter what happens, you become untouchable. You stop being tossed around by every mood, every comment, every loss. You move through life with quiet strength, and that strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove itself, it just is. It's in the way you respond instead of react. In the way you hold peace when the world expects anger. In the way you walk away from what drains you instead of fighting to be understood. That's what self-mastery looks like. That's what freedom feels like. Most people think peace is something they'll find once everything in their life finally makes sense. But life rarely offers that kind of order. It's unpredictable, messy, full of change and noise. If you wait for everything to settle before you rest, you'll spend your whole life waiting. Peace isn't what happens when the storm ends. It's what you build while standing in the rain. It's the quiet you create inside yourself when the outside world refuses to be quiet. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They lived in chaos, wars, loss, betrayal, yet they found stillness. Because their peace didn't depend on control, it depended on acceptance. They practiced the art of focusing only on what they could control. Their thoughts, their actions, their responses. Everything else was simply weather passing through. And when you start living that way, something changes. You stop wasting your energy trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You stop trying to convince people to understand you. You stop trying to control how the world moves. Instead, you learn to move with it, like a river flowing around rocks instead of fighting them. That's what strength really looks like. Not resistance, but flexibility. You become unshaken, not because life is easy, but because you stopped expecting it to be. You find a deep kind of calm that no situation can take away, because it's not built on circumstance. It's built on clarity. When something goes wrong, you don't ask, "Why me?" You ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" When people disappoint you, you don't collapse. You remind yourself that their actions reflect their state of mind, not your worth. When things fall apart, you don't panic, you rebuild, because you've learned that what matters most cannot be destroyed. Your values, your peace, your awareness. Those are your real possessions, and once you protect them, no loss can truly harm you. This is why the Stoics called peace a discipline. It's not something you stumble upon, it's something you train daily. Every challenge is practice. Every reaction is a mirror. Every choice is an opportunity to strengthen your inner calm. And the more you practice, the more unshakable you become. So when life tests you again, and it will, remember, this stillness isn't the absence of motion. It's the strength to move through the noise without losing yourself. That's how you turn chaos into clarity. That's how you find peace in the middle of everything. There will come a day when you stop chasing peace and start creating it. When you stop waiting for someone to understand you and begin understanding yourself. When you no longer need everything to make sense to feel safe within yourself, that's the moment your real power begins. Because peace is not something you find outside, it's something you build inside every day. It starts small with awareness. It grows through patience and becomes strength through discipline. The Stoics didn't preach about perfection. They practiced perspective. They knew life would test them, but they refused to let the test define them. They trained the mind to stay calm, not because they were emotionless, but because they valued clarity more than chaos. They chose peace not as an escape, but as a response. And you can do the same. You can meet the noise with stillness, the hate with understanding, the fear with focus. You can be surrounded by storms and still not lose your direction. That's the power of presence. You stop being dragged by the past or pulled by the future. You start living where life actually happens right here in this moment. And in this moment you always have a choice. To feed the noise or to free yourself from it, to let the thought control you or to simply watch it pass, to react or to respond. Every choice becomes a seed of peace or chaos. The more you choose peace, the stronger it grows, until it becomes your nature, not your effort. You start seeing clearly even when life is unclear. You start moving with purpose even when others doubt. You stop trying to be understood and focus on understanding. You stop fighting for control and start mastering your focus. That's what the Stoics called inner freedom. It's not the absence of pain. It's the mastery of self in the presence of it. And when you reach that place, everything changes. People can say what they want. Circumstances can shift. Fate can test you, but you remain grounded because you finally understand peace is not something you protect. It's something you embody. It lives in your awareness, in your patience, in your ability to stay still when everything around you moves. That's where real strength lives. That's where true peace begins. This is the path of the Stoic mind, the quiet rebellion against chaos, the choice to stay steady in a world that never stops moving. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes when you stop trying to control everything, when you finally understand that not every battle deserves your energy, that not every thought needs your belief, that not every emotion requires a reaction. That's the moment you begin to master yourself, because real power is not loud. It's calm. It's not about proving your worth to others. It's about knowing it within yourself. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't chase comfort, they built character. They didn't seek control over the world. They sought control over the mind. And when you start doing the same, life begins to change in subtle ways. You stop taking things personally. You start seeing that most people act from their own confusion, not because of you. You stop rushing to fix every problem and instead learn to face it with patience. You stop fearing failure because you understand that every fall teaches you balance, that every setback reveals what still needs growth. You realize that peace doesn't come from having an easy life. It comes from having a steady mind, a mind that doesn't collapse under pressure, a mind that observes before it reacts, a mind that understands that not everything needs to be solved immediately. Sometimes you just need to breathe, to let things unfold, to trust that clarity always returns once the storm passes, because storms don't last forever, but your awareness can, and that awareness is your anchor. It keeps you from being carried away by fear and doubt. It reminds you that how you see something shapes how you experience it. If you see chaos as punishment, you suffer. If you see it as a teacher, you grow. That's the Stoic way, to remain unshaken in the face of noise, to respond with calm where others panic, to choose discipline over distraction, to stay rooted in who you are instead of what happens around you. And with time, that calm becomes your nature. You stop fighting everything and start flowing with life. You stop being a prisoner of your emotions and become their master. That is where peace becomes unbreakable, not because the world stopped testing you, but because you learned how to meet every test with stillness. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's the kind of strength that no one can take from you. There's a point in your journey where silence starts speaking louder than words, where your peace becomes your response and your focus becomes your defense. You stop needing to explain yourself because you understand not everyone can meet you where you stand. You stop needing to prove your worth because you've seen what self-respect feels like. That's the shift from reaction to mastery. The Stoics called it the freedom of the inner life, a space no one can invade no matter what happens outside. You begin to protect your attention the way others protect money. You stop spending it on drama opinions and things that don't grow you. You learn that not everything deserves a reaction, that some things only lose their power when you refuse to feed them. You realize that silence isn't weakness, it's control. It's choosing not to let someone else's chaos rewrite your peace, because every time you react in anger, you give away your strength. Every time you chase validation, you hand over your focus. And every time you argue with what already is, you suffer twice. So instead of resisting life, you start observing it. You move slower, not out of fear, but out of awareness. You start to notice patterns. What drains you, what strengthens you, what deserves your energy. You learn that calm isn't founded, practiced, through stillness, through patience, through restraint, and the more you practice, the more power you carry in your silence. People will call it cold, but it's not. It's clarity. It's the understanding that peace is too expensive to trade for temporary emotion, that energy is too valuable to waste on what doesn't evolve you. You begin to detach not out of apathy, but out of wisdom. You learn to walk away from noise, not because you don't care, but because you finally do, about your own well-being. That's what it means to be grounded in yourself, to stay rooted when the world tries to pull you apart, to let go without bitterness and move on without resentment. It's not about isolation, it's about preservation. You stop chasing closure and start choosing peace. You stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. You stop forcing people to understand your silence and start living in it. Because silence isn't empty. It's full of answers that words can't reach. Stillness isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. It's the quiet center you return to when everything outside is loud. It's the anchor that keeps you steady when life tests you again and again. The world will never stop moving. So if you wait for perfect conditions, you'll wait forever. Peace doesn't come from perfect surroundings. It comes from what you build inside yourself. When you sit quietly and face your thoughts without running, you begin to see clearly. You notice the patterns, the triggers, the old stories that have been playing for years. You see which thoughts deserve attention and which are just echoes. And with that seeing comes choice. The choice to respond or not to respond, the choice to engage or release the thought, the choice to stop letting your mind replay the same painful scenes over and over. That's where calm begins. Not in avoiding life, but in meeting it without being swept away. Even when the past whispers, you can choose to observe, not to react. Even when fear rises, you can choose presence, not panic. Even when doubt knocks, you can choose clarity, not confusion. This is the practice the Stoics lived by. They knew that the external world cannot give peace. It can only challenge it. So they trained their minds to remain steady. They practiced patience, awareness, and acceptance every day. And slowly what once felt heavy becomes light. What once controlled you becomes a tool you understand. Your mind stops dragging you into old stories and begins guiding you toward wisdom. And that guidance is subtle, quiet, powerful. It shows you the path, not through force but through attention, through noticing what matters and what does not, through understanding that your energy is finite and must be protected, through learning that the most important battles are the ones inside, because the inner life shapes everything else. And when you master it, the world no longer shakes you the same way. You don't need permission to be calm. You don't need justification to stay focused. You simply return to the still center within yourself over and over. That's how clarity grows. That's how peace becomes unshakable. That's how you move through life with presence, strength, and freedom. There is a quiet power that comes when you stop resisting your own mind. When you stop trying to fix every thought and simply watch them pass. The mind will always offer stories, doubts, fears, but you are not those stories. You are the one who notices them, the observer who chooses what to follow. Stillness begins the moment you pause instead of react. The moment you see a thought and let it be without judgment. It is in that pause that awareness is born. At first, the noise will rise louder when you refuse to engage it. That is normal. The mind testing old habits, trying to pull you back into reactivity. But each time you resist, you weaken the grip of those automatic patterns. Even one moment of calm is progress. Even one breath of presence is a victory. The more often you create that space, the more life shifts. You begin to respond to life instead of being carried by it. You begin to see clearly what truly matters and what is just background noise. You learn to stop believing everything you think and start seeing the patterns behind the thoughts. You notice which fears are old and which doubts are unnecessary. And in that noticing there is freedom. Freedom to choose your response. Freedom to redirect your energy. Freedom to remain grounded. The mind becomes a tool instead of a tyrant. The chaos outside does not vanish, but your inner steadiness becomes unshakable. And the more you practice this stillness, the more it carries into every part of life. It is not silence. It is presence, not emptiness, but awareness. Not avoidance, but mastery. That is the quiet strength the Stoics cultivated, and the kind of calm you can embody too. Awareness grows quietly over time. It begins the moment you catch yourself thinking the same old thought and do not follow it down its usual spiral. You pause, you observe, you notice, as if watching someone else's life play across the screen of your mind. And in that subtle shift, you step out of the noise and into clarity. That space between thinking and observing is where freedom lives. It is not dramatic, it is gentle, it unfolds slowly. At first, doubts and fears will still appear. They will still rise like waves. But they no longer knock you off balance because you are beside them, not inside them. You see the timing, the triggers, the patterns. Some thoughts come only when you are tired, some only when you are lonely. Some belong to old stories you never chose but carried anyway. When you recognize the patterns, you stop mistaking repetition for truth. What once felt like certainty becomes an echo, and echoes only have power if you keep responding. You begin to realize you do not have to pick up every mental call. You can let it ring, you can let it pass. Awareness is not about silencing the mind. It is about illuminating it. Bringing thoughts into the light changes their power over you. When you watch without running, without judging, your relationship with them shifts. You do not erase the thought, you simply see it clearly, and clarity itself is freedom. It is the ability to separate what is happening from what your mind is projecting, to stop reacting automatically and begin responding with choice. Even when the mind still pulls you, you can step back afterward and ask, what is really happening here? That question without judgment loosens the knots in your thinking. You begin to recognize the fear, the resistance, the old scripts. And with presence and patience, you teach your mind a new way. A stillness that comes not from suppression, but from seeing clearly, from not being dragged around by every impulse. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react that matters." That space between stimulus and response is where awareness lives, and awareness is the foundation of inner strength. Thoughts will continue to rise. doubts, fears, memories, but they arrive differently. Once you are aware, they no longer knock you over because you are beside them, not inside them. You watch, you notice, you learn the patterns, the triggers, the timing. You begin to see that certain thoughts appear only when you are tired, others when you are lonely. Some belong to old stories you never chose but carried anyway. Recognizing these patterns allows you to stop mistaking repetition for truth. What once felt like certainty now sounds like an echo, and echoes lose power when you stop responding to them. You realize you do not have to pick up every mental call. You can let some ring and pass unnoticed. Awareness is not about silencing your mind. It is about illuminating it. Bringing thoughts into the light changes their hold over you. Observing without running, without judging, shifts your relationship with them. You do not erase the thought, you see it clearly. Clarity itself is freedom. It allows you to separate what is happening from what your mind projects, to respond instead of reacting automatically. Even when old patterns pull you back, you can step aside afterward and ask, what is actually happening here? That gentle question loosens the knots in your mind. You begin to recognize fear, resistance, and old scripts. With presence and patience, you teach your mind a new response. A stillness that comes from seeing clearly, not from suppressing, from not being dragged by every impulse. Epictetus reminded us it is not what happens, but how you react that matters. The space between stimulus and response is where awareness is born, and awareness is the foundation of unshakable inner strength. There comes a point when you realize that trying to control every thought only strengthens the noise, that the more you chase peace, the further it drifts away. True calm is built in the space between noticing and reacting. It grows in the moments when you choose observation over judgment, when you see the patterns in your mind without needing to fix them, when you let emotions rise and fall like waves without being swept away. At first this will feel strange. The mind will resist. It will push back with old fears, old doubts, old stories. But each time you pause, each time you observe, instead of reacting, you weaken those patterns. You learn that you are not the anxiety, the memory, or the fear. You are the witness, the observer, the one who notices. And in that noticing lies power, the power to step back, to breathe, to choose how you respond. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That truth becomes alive in these moments. Your past loses its grip because you are no longer inside its story. You see thoughts for what they are, not truths, but fragments, echoes of old experiences. And that separation gives you freedom. The freedom to redirect your energy to what matters, to cultivate focus, to live intentionally. Even 1 second of that awareness is a victory. A crack in the wall where light gets in. And the more often you practice it, the less you live on autopilot. You start making conscious choices instead of reacting automatically. You begin to live instead of merely surviving the chaos of your mind. When you begin to observe your thoughts without being consumed by them, you start to see clearly. You notice the ways your mind loops over the same fears, the same doubts, the same old stories. You realize that most of what you react to is repetition, not reality. And in that realization there is freedom. Freedom to step back, to breathe, to pause before reacting. Freedom to choose your response, instead of being pulled by old patterns. The anxiety, the memory, the fear are no longer your identity. They are visitors passing through your awareness. You are the one who watches. You are the one who decides, and with that decision comes power. The power to redirect your energy to what matters, to focus on what frees you to build your life consciously. Each moment of noticing strengthens your inner calm. Each pause between stimulus and response is a victory over automatic reaction. You begin to see the space between yourself and your thoughts, and in that space you gain choice. You can choose not to follow the old storylines that bring pain. You can choose to breathe instead of spiraling. You can choose not to internalize someone else's rejection, as your identity. It is simple, but it is the foundation of real change. Because without that space, without that quiet awareness, you remain trapped in reaction, surviving instead of living. Awareness transforms the battlefield of your mind into a place of clarity and strength. And once you see your thoughts clearly, you no longer give them the power to control you. The moment you realize you are not your thoughts, everything begins to shift. You start observing instead of absorbing. You stop being pulled by every passing mental storm. You no longer react to fear as if it were prophecy. You notice the space between stimulus and response, and in that space something incredible emerges. Choice, the ability to decide how you respond instead of being trapped by old patterns. You can pause before spiraling. You can step back before reacting. You can refuse to let someone else's rejection define you. It may feel simple, but it is the foundation of profound transformation. Without that space, you remain a passenger in your own mind, reacting automatically, surviving instead of living. With awareness, you reclaim control. You begin to see thoughts for what they are, not truths but echoes. You begin to detach from anxiety, from fear, from old memories, and in that detachment you gain freedom. The chains that once bound your mind loosen. The noise quiets, and you begin to live not according to every passing emotion but according to your own clarity and intention. Many people spend years trying to fix themselves when the only thing broken was their belief that thoughts were facts. I am not good enough. They don't care about me. I'll always be this way. These are not truths. They are phrases repeated so often they feel real, but feelings are not facts and thoughts are not identities. You are not the anxiety that rises in a crowd. You are not the memory that haunts you when alone. You are not the fear whispering when you try something new. You are the one who notices all of these. And in that noticing you gain the power to detach, to step back, to breathe, to observe without being consumed. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That single idea can transform a life, because it reminds you that your past does not define you, that trauma does not have to shape you completely, that the thoughts rising from wounds need not become your script. They can float in and out like clouds across the sky of your awareness, but only if you stop chasing them, arguing with them, fearing them. You must learn to watch calmly, patiently, without judgment, because only when you see your thoughts clearly can you respond wisely. It is not about controlling the mind like a machine. It is about observing it like a garden. Weeds grow on their own patterns you did not ask for, beliefs you did not choose. But once you see them, you can decide whether they belong. Little by little, you clear space for what is intentional. Clarity is not the absence of thought. It is the recognition that not all thoughts deserve your attention. Peace is not silence of the mind. It is the discipline to not feed every passing impulse. That discipline grows with awareness. At first, the noise will scream louder when you stop answering. That is normal withdrawal from mental habits that have dominated your inner world for years. But with time, silence returns, not emptiness but fullness. Fullness of you, the real you. The you that is not defined by moods, worries or self-doubt. The you that remains. When the storm passes, even one moment of that space, even 1 second of seeing a thought without being consumed is a victory, a crack in the wall where light gets in. The more often you create that space, the less you live on autopilot. You start catching yourself making conscious choices instead of reacting automatically. You begin to live, not merely survive your thoughts. And that shift is everything, because clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from thinking less and noticing more. It comes from creating space between who you are and what your mind says you are. That space is where your power lives, where your focus returns, where your energy stops being drained by what-ifs and starts being directed toward who you are becoming. The next time your mind offers a story that sounds painful, pause and breathe. Ask yourself, is this who I am, or is it just something I have heard so many times I began to believe it? Then decide if it deserves your energy. Most of the time it does not. Most of the time it is just noise. Now you are learning to hear it without becoming it. Clarity starts not by erasing the mind, but by rising above the noise. Awareness does not begin as a grand awakening. It begins quietly in a moment when you catch yourself thinking the same old thought you have thought 1,000 times. But this time you notice it. You do not react. You do not follow it down its usual spiral. You simply pause and observe, almost like watching someone else's life on the screen of your mind. And in that subtle shift, something powerful happens. You stop being a participant in the noise and become a witness. That space between thinking and observing is where awareness is born, not as a loud breakthrough, but as a gentle unfolding. The more you practice this, the more you simply sit with your mind. Instead of trying to fix, fight, or flee, you start to see it for what it is, not a monster to fear, but a messenger to understand. At first, the thoughts still come, the doubts, the fears, the memories, but they hit differently. They do not knock you over like before because you are not inside them anymore. You are next to them, watching, learning, noticing the timing, the triggers, the tone. You begin to see that certain thoughts appear only when you are tired, others only visit when you are lonely or uncertain. Some belong to old stories you never chose but carried anyway. Suddenly you realize these are not random. They are patterns, loops, scripts that have been playing for so long. They became background noise. Now that you see them clearly, they start to lose their grip. What once felt like truth begins to feel like repetition. The thought that always tells you you are not enough no longer hits like a fact. It sounds like an echo, and like all echoes, it only survives if you keep shouting into the same cave. But you do not have to keep responding. Awareness means realizing you do not have to pick up every mental call that rings in your head. You can let it ring, you can let it pass, and in doing so you weaken the chains that held you in place. ChatGPT said, "Still awareness does not ask you to fight your thoughts." That is where many get stuck, thinking the goal is to silence the mind or erase the thought entirely. But the mind does not work that way. It is not about elimination. It is about illumination. What you bring into the light no longer has the same power over you. When you watch something clearly without running or judging, you change your relationship to it. And that shift is the beginning of freedom. When you are unaware, imagined realities feel urgent and real. Your body tenses, your breath shortens, you react. But when you are aware, you interrupt the cycle. You feel the tension and trace it back. You question its origin. You realize the thought you are stuck in today is just a cousin of the thought you had yesterday and the day before. Once you see the pattern, you are no longer inside it. You are standing above it. There is something empowering about realizing you do not have to believe every thought just because it feels familiar. Just because a voice inside says you are not doing enough does not make it true. Sometimes it is just noise from an old chapter that does not belong in the new one. The more you observe without reacting, the more clearly you separate what is real from what your mind projects. Your mind will still bring up old patterns, doubts, and discomfort, but this time you notice them without being pulled in. You see the triggers, the moments when they rise, the way they shift your focus. Some thoughts appear only when fatigue sets in, others when uncertainty creeps. They are remnants of stories you never chose yet carried anyway. Once you observe clearly, you stop mistaking repetition for truth. What once felt urgent now just passes like shadows. You realize you do not need to engage with every inner voice. Some can simply exist without draining your energy. Watching without judgment changes your relationship with them. You begin to create distance between yourself and the impulses that once controlled you. That space allows your attention to return to what matters. It opens room for calm, for choice, for intentional action. Every moment you practice this, the chains of automatic reaction loosen, and the mind that once felt crowded begins to feel spacious again. Even as thoughts surface, they no longer control your focus. You notice the sensations they bring, the tension in your chest, the rush of unease. Instead of reacting, you simply allow them to be observed. You begin to see that most of what unsettles you exists only in the mind. Old regrets, fears, and imagined outcomes lose urgency when witnessed without judgment. The mind starts to feel less like a battlefield and more like a space you inhabit. Every time you step back, you reclaim a little more energy. You recognize the difference between what demands your attention and what can safely pass. Gradually you create room for clarity, the habits of constant mental struggle weaken, and you start living with more intentionality. Your choices grow deliberate. Your focus sharpens. You are learning that real power comes not from forcing control, but from patient awareness and the courage to simply notice. Awareness begins to shift how you interact with every thought. You see the impulses that used to pull you into anxiety and hesitation. Instead of following them, you allow space to respond differently. You notice the patterns that once dictated your reactions and understand their origin. The mind no longer feels like it is working against you. You begin to realize that calm is not absence of thought, but mastery over attention. Every pause you create strengthens your ability to act with intention. You start responding rather than reacting. You start choosing rather than being carried by old habits. The clutter in your mind slowly clears. Each moment of presence reinforces your ability to remain centered. You begin to inhabit your thoughts instead of being inhabited by them. And in that inhabitation, you discover freedom and control you never had before. As you continue observing your mind, you notice subtle shifts. The tension that once grabbed your attention now softens when acknowledged. You realize that not every thought requires action or analysis. Some exist only to be seen and released. Your awareness grows like a quiet current beneath every decision you make. You start to recognize the difference between urgency and importance. The mind that once felt chaotic begins to feel spacious. You learn to ride the waves of emotion without being swept away. Each moment of noticing without judgment strengthens your inner resilience. Old stories that used to dictate your feelings lose their grip. You begin to understand that clarity is cultivated in patience, not force. And in that patience, your energy stops being scattered and starts being intentional. You are no longer a passenger in your own mind. You are the observer, the navigator, and slowly the architect of your inner world. You start to see the subtle ways your mind distracts you. The small fears, the lingering doubts, the unfinished thoughts. Instead of being pulled into them, you simply notice their presence. You learn to distinguish between what serves you and what drains you. Every observation without reaction builds quiet strength. You recognize that the stories you tell yourself are often habits, not truth. The mind that once felt heavy begins to lighten as you release automatic tension. You begin to act from clarity rather than impulse. Each conscious choice reinforces your sense of control. You feel the difference between living in reaction and living with awareness. Slowly, the constant chatter loses urgency. You discover that the space between noticing and responding is where freedom lives. And in that freedom, your energy begins to flow toward creation rather than chaos. You notice how often the mind clings to what is familiar, even when it causes discomfort. Patterns of worry and self-criticism arise automatically. Instead of chasing them, you watch them with calm attention. You see that the thoughts are not instructions. They are echoes of habit. The space you create between observing and reacting becomes a sanctuary. In that space you begin to feel choice instead of compulsion. The mental noise that once felt overwhelming starts to fade. You start responding to life from clarity, not confusion. Each moment of patient witnessing strengthens your sense of self. You realize that you are not defined by what crosses your mind. You are defined by how you navigate it. The more you practice this, the more effortless it becomes. And gradually you step into a life guided by intentional focus rather than scattered reaction. As you sit with your awareness, you begin to notice layers beneath the surface, the subtle currents of tension that influence your decisions without you realizing it, the quiet judgments you hold about yourself that shape how you approach every interaction. For the first time you see them clearly, and you do not have to act on them. You allow them to exist without letting them dictate your choices. This act of witnessing creates space inside you, a space where energy is no longer drained by automatic reactions, where clarity replaces confusion and presence replaces distraction. You begin to understand that most of the mind's urgencies are manufactured by habit, old fears replaying like films you never chose to watch. The endless what-ifs and imagined scenarios start to lose their power. You see that your attention is a tool you can wield, not a slave to whatever thought arises. In this new relationship with your mind, you discover freedom, freedom from the compulsion to react, freedom from the weight of imagined outcomes, freedom to act with intention rather than habit. Every moment you practice this, you reinforce your inner strength. You notice that the mind becomes a resource, not a battlefield. You begin to create the life you want, not by forcing it, but by attending to it with care. The clarity you cultivate here seeps into your daily life. Your conversations become more present, your actions more deliberate. You start making choices rooted in awareness rather than fear. The energy that was once scattered by compulsive thought now flows toward creation, toward meaningful action, toward the person you are choosing to become. And in this process you realize something vital, that life is not about eliminating the mind's noise. It is about creating a relationship with it, one where you are not dominated by your thoughts, but guided by your attention, where every decision is informed by presence, not panic. And as this awareness deepens, you notice a profound shift. The world no longer pulls at you so violently. Chaos may exist around you, but inside you have cultivated a center, a place of steady attention, clear focus, and intentional energy. Here you discover that true strength is not in controlling the world, but in mastering the space within. The space where thought arises is now a space you inhabit consciously, and from this space everything you do begins to reflect clarity, purpose, and calm. You begin to notice the quiet power in simply being present, not forcing change, not chasing thoughts, not trying to fix anything, just observing the flow of ideas, feelings, and impulses as they arise. Each moment of calm observation strengthens a subtle inner authority. You see that the mind's restlessness is not a threat, it is a signal that attention has wandered or that habits are at play. By noticing without acting, you reclaim the energy that once fueled reaction. You begin to realize that patience with yourself is a form of courage, that stillness is not inaction, but a preparation for deliberate action. You learn to distinguish between urgency and importance, between impulse and choice. Every thought you witness without judgment becomes less capable of controlling you. The stories you once believed about your limitations begin to lose weight. You discover that your inner life can be a source of stability, even when the outer world is unpredictable or demanding. You are no longer at the mercy of every passing fear or worry. You have cultivated the ability to pause, assess, and respond. Your attention returns to what truly matters, not what the mind screams is urgent. Over time, this builds a sense of resilience that is quiet but undeniable. You start to inhabit your life from this place of awareness. Every decision comes from clarity, not compulsion. And as this practice deepens, you notice that freedom is not an external reward. It is the result of mastering your relationship with the mind. The center you create within becomes a compass, a source of guidance. And in that center, the noise of the world no longer dictates your experience. You begin to act with purpose, presence, and energy that feels aligned with who you truly are. As you continue cultivating awareness, you notice the subtle ways your energy is spent, the moments when worry or doubt quietly pull your focus away from what matters. Instead of being swept into them, you observe the pattern and let it pass. You see that most mental agitation comes from stories you keep retelling, stories of what could go wrong or what you failed to do. By noticing without reacting, you weaken their grip. You begin to recognize that calm is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of perspective, the ability to act with intention despite difficulty. Each pause you take before responding becomes a building block of inner strength. Your mind slowly shifts from a place of constant reaction to a space of considered choice. You discover that clarity is cultivated in attention, not in force. The moments of still observation add up until they form a foundation where your decisions come from presence, not habit, where your energy is directed by awareness, not by old mental patterns. And in this foundation, you find the freedom to navigate life with focus, confidence, and calm. You begin to notice how often the mind runs on autopilot. Old fears and habitual thoughts rise without your awareness. Instead of reacting, you pause and simply watch. You see the rhythm of these mental patterns, the triggers that spark them, and you start to realize that most of the mind's chaos is optional. Not every thought needs a response, not every feeling demands action. You create space to breathe, to consider, to choose. The small moments of conscious noticing slowly accumulate. Each one adds clarity, energy, and focus to your inner life. You begin to act with intention rather than being pulled by impulse. The mind that once felt crowded and chaotic now feels spacious and manageable. You notice the subtle freedom in understanding that you are not your thoughts, that your energy belongs to you, and you decide where it flows. This realization changes how you move through daily life, how you respond to challenges, how you prioritize, and how you inhabit your own presence. And in this shift you see that control does not come from suppressing thoughts. It comes from mastering attention and choosing what to engage with. You start to understand that inner clarity is built one moment at a time. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you notice a thought without following it, you reinforce your ability to stay grounded amid mental noise. You see that the mind often confuses familiarity with truth. Old fears and assumptions rise automatically, but you are no longer compelled to follow them. You begin to choose which thoughts deserve your focus and which can simply drift by. This practice creates a quiet confidence that does not depend on circumstances. Your energy is no longer scattered on imagined problems or old regrets. You act from presence and intention rather than distraction and habit. With each conscious choice, you reclaim a little more freedom. You notice how much lighter life feels when you stop living inside compulsive patterns. The mental space you create allows you to respond creatively and decisively. You are no longer caught in cycles of reaction, but able to navigate life with clarity, and in this space you discover the real power of awareness, patience, and deliberate attention. And now you stand at the edge of understanding, a place where observation meets choice. You feel the subtle shift of energy as attention returns to what truly matters. The mind no longer drags you into storms of fear, regret, or imagined failures. You inhabit a space where thoughts are noticed but do not define you. Here you see that true strength is quiet, consistent, and built in awareness. The freedom to choose your next move becomes natural, effortless, and inevitable. You begin to act with clarity even when the world around you feels chaotic. Every pause, every breath, every moment of noticing compounds into inner resilience. You recognize that peace is not given. It is cultivated through patience, practice, and presence. The power to focus, to act, to create belongs to you, and no external circumstance can take it. In this awareness, you are no longer a passenger, but the navigator, the architect of your inner world. Your energy flows toward intention, not reaction. Your life reflects presence, not distraction. And as you carry this practice forward each day, your mind becomes a sanctuary, a space where clarity guides decisions, courage informs action, and freedom resides. This is where transformation is born, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet mastery of your own attention. Here your life begins to reflect the person you are choosing to become. And here, Stoicism Notebook reminds you that the mind you cultivate becomes the life you live. You start to reclaim your energy, because attention shapes everything, and where it goes, your life follows. You don't need to have all the answers to take the next step. You only need the courage to begin right where you are, exactly as you are. Clarity is not something that appears on its own. It is earned by moving through the fog, by showing up for yourself. Let this be the moment you stop waiting and start becoming. If this message resonated, there is another video waiting for you that will guide you even deeper. Thank you for being here and for being a part of Stoicism Notebook.